Everyone. My name is Michael Donnelly, and I'm an alcoholic. It is an absolute joy to be with you this morning. I cannot thank you enough for this tremendous honor. I got to tell you, we're sitting here in the Akron intergroup office on this beautiful Sunday morning, which started out rainy and cloudy, and there were storms going on, just like my life when I met all of you, only to find the sun shining in the background. Went to church buddy of mine in the program, picked me up from Cleveland, a guy named Jimmy, and we went off to Mass this morning. Just had a beautiful morning together, and met the good folks here at the Akron Intergroup office. Right after that, came in here, and it's just beautiful outside. It's a beautiful day. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. And before I begin, I want to thank Dan for inviting me. I want to thank the committee, the tremendous speakers and panelists that we have had all weekend so far. I want to thank Walk the Talk Recordings for being a part of this and helping us carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous through media. We appreciate that for sure. Good friends all around the world tonight, especially my good buddies in South Africa and in India and throughout the United States. I'm very blessed to know you, very blessed to have you in my life, Northern Ireland as well. And just cannot express my gratitude enough. Before I begin, I just want to make sure that I have covered everything. Oh, yeah, my sponsors. I want to thank Don, who I love so much, and my previous sponsors, Mark and Dick, and especially Keith Lewis, who was a tremendous blessing to me. And a gentleman that we're going to talk about in a few moments who's gone home. His name was Joe Friday. He was my very first AA sponsor. And before I start telling my story, I want to be clear about my story. My story is a love story. It is not a drunk story. It sounds like a drunk story, but it's really a love story. Because God, with his infinite love and his power and his incredible forgiveness and grace, saw fit when I didn't think it was possible to reach into the gutter that was my life and pull me out. And I'll be forever grateful for him for that. And for the people that he put in my life to let me know that he was doing that, because it didn't look like that to me. It looked like absolutely the worst possible thing in the world was coming to you. And it turns out, at least for me, it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. I was born on the south side of Chicago to two really phenomenal people. My father was a police lieutenant in Chicago, absolutely till this day, still my hero. My dad was the finest man I ever have laid eyes on. I'm wearing his cufflinks today. I'm not a jewelry guy, but I'm wearing his cufflinks and his tie tack today. This is a tie that I bought for my ma's funeral, who was next to my father. Again, one of the greatest people I've ever met in my life. They sacrificed their lives for my sister and I. They loved us with a love that only God can give. And I feel very pleased that I got to grow up in that home. Now, that isn't always the case. When you first met me a while ago, back in 1991, when I first wandered into your doors, I'm not sure I would have considered them wonderful people, but I do today. And it is absolutely true that they are and were. My dad went off to work one day when I was 6 years old, and he didn't come home. And that was pretty normal. He was a police lieutenant on the south side of Chicago, a lot of work to do there. And so he was doing the OT thing every day. And this one particular day, we could tell was a little bit different, though. My dad had an artery break in his bowel and went to the hospital. He's 42 years old. Today, they could likely fix that pretty easily, but not back in 1972. They couldn't do much about that. And my dad laid in bed and hemorrhaged to death. And everything in our world just changed. It just completely was altered. It completely was different. My mom, who, again, tremendous warrior, right? I mean, just a good, solid Irish Catholic mother, just picked up the pieces and ran, made sure that my sister and I went to good schools, made sure that my sister and I got educated, made sure that my sister and I had a roof over our head and meals on the table. And they weren't steak and lobster, man, but they were meals every single night, every single day, every single night. We had clean clothes when we got up and went off to school every day. She was a tremendous lady. But there was something broken in me. I wasn't really sure exactly how to talk about all that stuff. Didn't really have a language for it. Didn't know how to communicate any of that. The pain that was going on inside of me. I felt different than my classmates, even as far back as them. just felt really different than everybody. And one day I was probably about 12 or 13 years old, I guess, probably 13. And my friends and I were in a Central Park in Mount Greenwood neighborhood in Chicago. And this guy came by, and he was one of the coolest looking guys I had ever seen. He had a bandana on. He had a Black Doors concert t-shirt on. He had faded jeans on. And he had like a roach clip with like a peacock feather hanging off of the bandana. And he came up to us and he asked us if we did any extracurricular activities. And we weren't really sure what to say. We were a little scared of him, but still excited that he was there. He was a cool guy. And we were sitting there talking to him. And anyways, that led me down a road to where I ended up. And that door, just cracking that door open just a little bit, led me down a path that suddenly, to do more and more and more things, became easier and easier and easier to do. It gave me license in a way to continue to venture down that road. And I got to tell you, I did a lot of things I probably shouldn't have done back then. But the one thing that I found that was very consistent in my life was booze. And booze made me feel normal. I don't know about you. I don't know about anybody on the call. I don't know where you're from or what your background is. I don't know how tall you are, how much money you make, how educated you are. I don't really even care. As far as Alcoholics Anonymous and what we do, there's some key questions that I think are really important no matter where we come from. And one of those key questions was, as I mentioned earlier, my very first sponsor, Joe Friday, absolutely made it mandatory that I answer these questions for myself. We can fast forward a little bit till I was 21 years old, and I landed in Alcoholics Anonymous, and Joe and I were sitting in a coffee shop called the Crackpot. How ironic, I know, but that's the name of that was the name of the restaurant. And so we're sitting there having coffee, and I asked Joe to be my sponsor, and he said, "I don't know, maybe," which I thought was, less than loving, right? I mean, he should be so honored that I asked him, And what he said was, "I'll tell you what, I'll tell you my story, Mike, and then you tell me your story. And if at the end of that transaction, we think we can work together, I'll sponsor you." I said, okay. So he told me his story. And I got to be honest with you, I didn't hear a word he said. I was so interested and couldn't wait to tell him my story that whatever he said just sort of bounced off my forehead and left the conversation. And I was writing my own. And he finished and I started. And I got a couple of minutes into it. And boom, he just cut me off. Rather abruptly, rather rudely, but he cut me off. And he said, "Mike, you have no idea what alcoholism is, do you?" And I said, "No, I know what alcoholism is. Alcoholism is about chronic drunkenness." And he said something that radically changed my life, what I view alcoholism as, and certainly therefore what I view recovery from alcoholism as. He said, "Mike, drunkenness and alcoholism have almost nothing to do with each other." And then he sat quiet for a second, as if he wanted that question to just sort of that statement to sort of sink into me. And it did. I said, "No, wait, what?" He said, "Alcoholism and drunkenness have almost nothing to do with each other." And I didn't know where he was going. And he could see that on my face. I had probably 62 or so days of sobriety at this point. And he said, "Look, I know you're new and it's okay. And maybe there's new people on the call today. I certainly hope so. And if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, or you've left and you've come back, no matter how many times that is, I want you to hear someone, hopefully many, we've heard it all weekend, but I want you to hear someone say this to you. Welcome. We're glad you're here. And if you have this thing that we call alcoholism, we have a solution that works. I have personally never seen it not work. I've seen it, a lot of people attempt it and stop. I've seen a lot of people go halfway, 3/4, even 7/8 through it, stop, and it not work. But I've never seen someone consistently try, not perfectly, but consistently try. The consistent part is what they did perfectly, not the actual accomplishment of it all. They just consistently tried over and over and over, no matter how many repeated fallings they had. They consistently tried. I've never seen somebody fail who has done our program with a heart of trying, with a heart of commitment to continuing, no matter how many times it seems like the sun has just been blocked out from the sky. No matter how dark it gets, they keep trying. Never seen anybody fail in that. As Joe sat across from me, he could see sort of I didn't know what he was talking about because I was new, maybe like you are. And he said, look, Mike, in our book, we have this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, yeah, I remember seeing it's a blue one. He said, yeah, that's right. It's a blue one. And he said, look, in that book, there's like a chapter at the beginning, right? And it's called The Doctor's Opinion. And in the doctor's opinion, Mike, it describes the disease of alcoholism in 3 parts. And then the rest of the book kind of explains more and more about it through experience, through people's stories, through more descriptions. He said, but that doctor's opinion is really important. You see, Mike, because if for me, and he was talking about himself here, he said, if I didn't understand what I'd have, if I didn't understand what alcoholism was and what was ailing me, I'd automatically pick a wrong solution. He said, so it's important that I rightly diagnose myself. He said, when I came, maybe like you, Mike, I thought I had a problem with drinking. He said, I didn't. I had a problem with stopping drinking, which sounds like the same thing, but it's very different. You see, Mike, in that doctor's opinion, it describes a 3-fold problem that we call alcoholism, and it begins with a physical allergy. That for some reason, and he pointed to himself, Joe pointed to himself, he said, this body, this physiology is broken. It's abnormal when it comes to booze. Now, A doesn't have an opinion on why. In many ways, A doesn't even care why. What A cares about is that true for you, Mike? Is that true for you? When you digest alcohol, what happens? I didn't really have an answer for that. I never really thought about it. It wasn't something that I even thought about, this idea of digesting alcohol. I mean, who thinks that way, right? And he began to tell his story in great detail, again, that he had just finished, that I wasn't listening to, that suddenly I was extremely interested to listen to. And he talked about how his body, no matter how much he decided he wasn't going to drink and get drunk, that he ended up drinking a little bit and then eventually drinking a lot of it and getting really drunk. I got to tell you, that mirrored my story. See, I don't know about anybody on this call, but the reason that I popped into Alcoholics Anonymous at the age of 24, in August of 91, was because I was tired of hurting people that I had loved. You see, I had a beautiful fiance in my life, and I had really, really hurt her badly. She's a wonderful person. To this day, still a wonderful person. I had my mom, who tried to raise her son from with my dad. And after he passed away, my mom picked up that torch and ran with it. I had crushed that woman. My sister, who loved me very, very much. I hurt her many, many times over, both emotionally and sometimes even physically. There were a lot of regrets I had in my life. And the one thing I wanted to do was stop causing the people that I loved from crying. I wanted to stop my behaviors, whatever that happened to be. And in my head, I centered it around booze so that they would stop crying. And so I wanted to quit. Not because I loved myself or because I was doing it for me. I got to tell you, I hated me so much that doing it for me wasn't an option. If you just said, Mike, you're going to fail if you don't do this for yourself, I'm telling you, I would have walked out believing I would have failed. Because I didn't love me. I didn't do this for me. I did this because as best I could, I tried to love other people. I tried to stop the people that I loved from crying. So if you're out there today and the self-loathing is so thick and you hear these well-intentioned statements, like you can't do this unless you do it for yourself, or you got to love in my experience, that is not necessarily 100% true. In my experience, that as long as I do it, regardless of the reason, it'll happen. God will honor the actions that we take. And from there, we can grow and blossom and become different people. But I sat across from this guy and he said, Mike, have you ever gone out with the intention of not getting drunk and end up insanely intoxicated? I said, Joe, you've just described the last year of my drinking. I mean, that's it. That's exactly what was happening to me. I was so tired of harming people, hurting people, belittling people. I just didn't want to do it anymore. And I would go out and I would have 1 or 2. I would have 3 or 4. I'd have 6 or 8. Right? I'd have 10 or 12. I'd have 14 or whatever it was. I would try to control and modify the amount I took because of the events that seemingly always took happening when I was drinking. And I had no idea that when I digest alcohol, something happens to people like me that don't happen in the average temperate drinker. I had no clue of that. That this allergy, this abnormal reaction to alcohol takes place in my body every single time I drink. And with Joe's explanation of that, I could sort of get my arms around that, why that was happening. And we read the doctor's opinion, and then we moved into Bill's story. And it's important that Bill's story is sort of placed where it was, right? It got moved from the back to the front of the book as an example of someone who suffers from that illness that we call alcoholism. And then on top of it, what a life might look like for someone who's recovering from it. Bill's story is so important. So important as we sit here with this backdrop of this beautifully historic place in our fellowship with those kinds of recollections in our book. It's amazing. And so Joe went on to talk about this second problem. He said, Mike, it sounds to me like you knew you couldn't drink. I said, yeah, I sort of knew that. I didn't know what was wrong with my body, but I sort of knew I shouldn't be drinking, or wouldn't be drinking, or couldn't be drinking. I better not be drinking. All those thoughts at different times ran through my head. He said, well, then why'd you go back? Nobody had ever asked me that. Nobody had ever asked me, why'd you go back? I don't know. I don't know. I've heard, why did you hurt me again? Why did you lie about that? I heard a lot of questions, but why, if you knew you couldn't drink successfully, why did you go back? Well, I think the easy answer is because it gave me some sense of relief. That's for sure. That is for sure. I got a great sense of ease and comfort from the first few drinks, but beyond that, given the devastation that almost always happened to me when I drank, like, why would I risk that? Why would I do that again? Well, Joe said to me, in our big book, and again, I know you're new, now I'm probably 65 to 68 days, somewhere in there. He said, we have this chapter called chapter 3, and it's called More About Alcoholism. And in that particular chapter, Mike, it describes the thoughts that precede the first drink. And maybe you should read that and think about what thoughts preceded your first drink. I got to tell you, I read that chapter, and some of the things I related to, some of the things I thought I understood, some of the things I didn't, but I kind of got the gist. And so I took some time and I thought, what thoughts got me back? I got to tell you, these are just some of them. None of them are complicated or sophisticated. They'd make most psychiatrists yawn and go to sleep, but they were important and impactful for me. And the number one thought that got me drunk over and over and over again, because I would start with one or two, the allergy would trigger itself and I would be off to the races. But what would get me started with those one or two were thoughts like this. Come on, dude, seriously, you're 24. You're only 24. Like you're never going to drink again. Like that, those seemingly trivial little thoughts. I was so unable, so powerlessness to even fight those little gnats off. I didn't need anything dramatic. Mine was small. It was like, hey, go drink. I was like, okay. It was like that kind of a thought got me every time. Things like leave at halftime, you know what? You should drive, because if you drive, you won't get drunk. I won't go into that fiasco, right? But I mean, these are the things that would get me every time. They were simple, regular things that would just sort of talk me back into drinking. And of course, once I would do that, boom, I'm off to the races because the allergy would trigger itself. So Joe and I are sitting again, talking again, another conversation, coffee's drinking, chain smoking, all that stuff, right? And I said, look, man, I think I have this allergy. I think I have this mind that lies to me. And I said, I think I'm ready for that. I think I want to do the deal. And he said, before I give you the good news, Mike, I got to tell you the bad news. And I said, what's that? And he said, you see, in Alcoholics Anonymous, even though we all have this allergy, we don't work on the body. And even though we have this mind that lies to us, we don't work on your brain, right? Contrary to popular belief, we're not physicians. We can't fix your body. And really contrary to popular belief, we are not counselors, therapists, psychiatrists. We don't mentor here. That's not what we do. And I was like, dude, where's the hope in that? Right? Like you walk me through all this stuff, right? And then you just sort of leave me hanging, leaning over the cliff, right? I said, well, if you don't work on the body and you don't work on the mind, like, what do you do? He said, Mike, we only work on the third part. And I said, what's that? And again, the answer changed my life. He said, Mike, that's your broken soul. Mike, that's the part of you that has longed for connection with God and another human being your whole life, and you've never been able to get there. That's the part of you that has felt the darkness of the ramifications, fancied or real, of your behavior in your life. It's the part of you that knows deep down that something is much worse than just drinking. It's the part of you that longs for authentic connection and you don't have any. Man, he stopped me in my tracks with that. He absolutely stopped me in my tracks with that. Because he was right. He was 100% right. At least in my case, he was. And that phrase, that broken soul phrase scared me a little bit. I think he kind of saw it on my face. And he said, Mike, do you have he said, I know you have the allergy and I know you have the mind that lies to you. He says, but do you have that broken soul thing? Do you have that? And I was nervous and scared. And I just said, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. Like I knew I did, but I didn't know how to say that. I mean, how do you say that? That phrase, broken soul, man, that fit me hand in glove. Whatever he was talking about, I knew I had it, but I couldn't say it out loud. I didn't know how to tell him. So he said, well, let me just talk to you a little bit and we'll ask you some questions and you get to answer those questions inside of yourself, right? Inside of yourself. And the first question he asked me was, Mike, is it wrong to lie? And I said, well, yeah, of course it's wrong to lie. Everybody knows that. He said, Mike, do you lie? And I was like, well, only when absolutely necessary, like when someone asks me a question, like those kinds of pivotal moments, a lie is called for, right? Didn't matter what the question was. Guys, I got to tell you, I would lie about stuff I didn't need to lie about. I'd be going off to the mall and people would say, where are you going? And I'd be like, I'm going to the grocery store. Like I would lie about stuff I didn't need to lie about. There were times I was actually stunned and applauded myself, applauded my own ego at the creative, elaborate, beautiful mosaic of lies that I could come up with without any thought process, by the way. I would just open my mouth, start talking, crap would flow out of it, and I would be as stunned as the listener sometimes about that. He said, do you lie? And I said, yeah. He said, Mike, is it wrong to spend $300 to $500 more a month than you actually make? And I went, yeah. And he said, can we look at your checkbook? No, I don't want to do that. Mike, how's your relationship with your mom? Not so good. Mike, is it wrong to use and objectify women? Yes. How's your last relationship? Not so good. He must have gone through 20 to 25 behavior questions, the oughts of life. Ought I do this? Ought I do that? Should I do this? Should I do that? I got all of those questions right. I knew all of the right answers on what I should do. And then he followed each one of those up with a behavior question. How am I applying that to my life? And I got all of those wrong. I knew sort of in a general way what to do. And I was failing at every turn. He said, Mike, in Alcoholics Anonymous, that is what we think our problem is. He says, Mike, lack of power is our dilemma, not lack of sobriety, lack of power. Mike, we have to find a power by which we could live, and it has to be a power greater than ourselves. Mike, that's pretty obvious. And I hope it's obvious to you now, Mike, that you knew what to do and lacked the power to actually apply it. Now, I'm not saying I fully knew what to do, because there's been a lot that I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous that I could have not learned without you. So I don't claim to know everything, but I knew generally how I should be living. And I wasn't even close. No power. That was my problem. And we went into this dialogue about that. And we moved on to step 2. He said, do you have an allergy? He said, yes. Do you have a mind that lies? Yeah. Do you have a broken soul? Yeah, I got that. We went on to step 2. And the thing that Joe told me about step 2 was I was supposed to come to believe something. And that very specific thing that I was to come to believe was that a God, a power greater than myself, could actually, not theoretically, could actually restore me to sanity. And over time, as I've looked at step 2, it's become a very, very powerful step for me. I think it's a crucial step. And it's a step that personally in my recovery, I've had to go back to many, many times in my life. Because see, when I sat across from Joe and I heard his fulfilling of his own 3rd step, that idea that he was going to bear witness to those he would help me of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life, as he lived out that 3rd step that he took in my life, which he called the 12th step. I thought I was working steps 1 and 2, right? In Joe's perspective, he was working step 12 as I was receiving and trying to do 1 and 2, right? We got to this spot. See, Joe knew something that I didn't believe, that God could restore me to sanity. And I needed Joe the knower to tell me, the unbeliever, a new idea. And the new idea was this, very simply put, God could restore me to sanity. That he could. That he had the power and the willingness and the love for me to do so. I'm not sure I fully believe that, but I'll tell you what I did believe. I did believe Joe. I had heard enough of his story. I knew he felt in similar ways like I did. I knew he had had similar struggles that I had. I knew that what he said, I could trust. And so I believed Joe about Joe's belief in a God who loved me. That was all we needed. Keep moving, he said. We went down and got on our hands and knees and we said the third step prayer. And he walked me through that beautiful, beautiful last paragraph on the bottom of 62, where it talks about God being our Father and our director and our principal and how we're his child and his agent. And when we make that deal with God, when that's the thing that happens at the top of the next page, it says, when we sincerely took such a position. What position? That God is Father, director, and principal, and we're child and agent. When God is those three things and I'm those two things, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. He would provide what we needed if we kept close to him, and performed his work well. And we said this prayer, and we got on our hands and knees in this clubhouse, and we said this prayer together. And while we were down there, he said, I don't want you to think for a second that you just completed step 3. And I said, well, we said the prayer. I've been in meetings and I heard that the prayer is the third step. He said, no, it's the third step prayer. That doesn't mean you did the third step by saying the prayer. He said, Mike, have you ever prayed in your past? And I got to tell you guys, I prayed a lot. I was raised in a good home. My mom and dad both taught me how to pray. I saw both my mom and dad pray regularly. I was taught all the prayers. Like it wasn't a new concept to me, right? And in my own drinking career, I've prayed next to toilet seats, right? Paul giggled yesterday afternoon about how the porcelain side of his, like there's something beautifully cool about a sweaty forehead after 3 days of drunkenness. You just, it's just refreshing, right? I've prayed next to toilet seats. I've prayed in the back of police cars. I've prayed when all I could see of people I love were their backs because they were walking away from me. I've prayed. The problem with my prayers is I never did anything different after the prayers. I just said the prayers. You see, in Alcoholics Anonymous, we don't just have a prayer. We have a prayer and then a process. And so we say the third step prayer, and then we get off our knees and we grab a piece of paper and a pen and we start writing that 4th step under the guidance of a sponsor right out of that book. And as Chris eloquently described last night, we look at our resentments, right? We look at the people, institutions, principles with whom we were angry. We get it all down on paper. We asked ourselves why we were angry, what parts of ourselves have been affected, and then what part of ourselves contributed to that. Was it our selfishness, our dishonesty, inconsiderate behavior, self-seeking? Were we frightened? We write all that down. And I thought that was it, but it's not it. You see, in our big book, there's prayers that are attached to each of those 3 things that we look at, in resentments and in fears and in the sex conduct part of our inventory. And what's interesting, right? And I thought, oh yeah, Joe, I remember the prayers. The prayers are like when you pray for the person you resent, and then after like 14 days, it just magically vanishes, right? Well, look, I got to be honest with you. You're never going to talk me out of praying for somebody I resent. I think that's great advice. I think that's an excellent thing to do for anybody. Praying for anybody is really good advice. But I got to tell you, in the big book, it doesn't push me, at least in that first 164, it doesn't encourage me or push me to pray for the person I resent. It encourages me and directs me to pray for myself. It says, God, save me from being angry. God, show me how to show this person that I resent the same pity, patience, tolerance, and love that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. God, change this sick heart. In some ways, it's implying that I am the chief victim of my own resentments, right? The great AA analogy. It's like I'm drinking the poison, hoping the other person dies. You know, I got to find freedom. It says that these resentments must be mastered. How about that? And then Joe said, once you're done with that, he said, we'll look down and we'll see where you checked fright, and we'll start talking about your fears and writing those down. And I did that. I wrote all those down. And in there, it talks about how we're on a different basis of living, the basis of trusting a loving God and not ourselves, not our finite selves any longer. Right? God, take away my fear. Show me who you would have me be. Bring me to the place where I can be what you want me to be instead of the demands I'm placing on my life, which are not being fulfilled. And I'm afraid, deeply afraid, that if other people see my brokenness, they'll do what I want to do, which is leave and not come back. That's what I wanted. That was the essence of all of my fears. You could sum up that whole inventory by this. I was afraid that other people would see me as I saw myself and do the very thing that I wanted to do with me, which was leave. And so I constantly, chronically pretended to be something I wasn't. Those prayers, that inventory helped me with that. And then it moved into sex conduct, right? And I thought that had everything to do with sexual activity or sexual behaviors. And certainly that's part of this, for sure. No question about it. But Joe is very clear that this was about my sex conduct. You see, sex is not only a verb, it's a noun. This was about my conduct as a man, right? We've all filled out job applications. And in the sex section, we don't write in please right after the interview, right? We don't say maybe, depending on your benefits package. That's not what we answer there. We pick one, right? This was about my life as a man and the falsehoods that encompassed it and the ways I tried to pretend to be more important than I really was, the ways that I would hurt people to get myself to not feel emasculated at life, to try to put myself at the head of the class instead of where I felt like I was in the back of it. I didn't know that, but that's what it was. And then in the middle of page 69, it asks us to go back to the list again and ask ourselves some questions. And the first question is, what should I have done instead? What a powerful, powerful answer. Or excuse me, question. Those answers are loaded with hope, right? What should I have done instead? It's as we got this all down on paper and we looked at it. And in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. And I tried as best I could to do that. I've done several over the years. They've altered quite a bit from those first early days. And then on page 70, those beautiful prayers, right? The prayers about how God will be the final judge. And Joe encouraged me to read my sex ideal to God and see if there was any loopholes in it. There were a few. He said to rewrite them every time I found a loophole. Seal those bad boys up. And then start praying those prayers, right? For sanity, for strength to do the right thing, for guidance in questionable situations, right? I mean, this idea that prayer is an essential part of the 4-step is really important to me. So I had all these papers and I ran over to this guy that Joe told me to go see, and I spent 6 hours with him reading everything I wrote down. And at the end of it, I was supposed to take this hour after my 5th step. That gentleman had invited God into that meeting with he and I. And so I could see how prayer was a part of the 5th step. And on the bottom of page 75, I was to take an hour and go home and ask myself some questions. And those questions were, are the stones properly in place? Have we tried to make mortar without sand, right? I mean, basically, I think what that's saying is, Mike, are you being sincere this time? You know, you've been a bit of a con, right? We got some history with your conning all the time, right? And so I think those questions were about me asking me, are you in? Are you serious about this or no? It says if we can answer to our satisfaction on the top of page 76, we then look at step 6. We've emphasized willingness as being indispensable. And basically those questions surround that about, am I willing to let God take all of me? And it doesn't slap my wrist if the answer is no. There's nothing in there that would lead me to believe I better make up some excuse about why I'm unwilling, or that I should deny that I'm unwilling, or that I should pretend I'm willing to all them home group members at my meeting so that they think I'm holy. It doesn't say any of that stuff. It doesn't say anything except this: pray for what you don't have. If those secret dark spots of your life, Mike, if you're unwilling to bring them to God, if you're unwilling to let God change those spots, okay. But do this: pray for the willingness. Pray for the willingness that someday you will let him in to those dark closets in your mind and in your heart and in your soul. That he'll someday have entry and access into all of you. And then it moves into step 7, and we have that beautiful prayer before we jump into 8 and 9. And I got to tell you, this idea of that 7-step prayer today is it's so powerful. It's absolutely one of the most powerful principles, I think, that's in the big book. This idea that I am now ready, that you should have all of me. You see, I don't know how you had relationships. I can tell you how I had personal relationships, and they had nothing to do with all at all. They had to do with parts. They had to do with parts. You see, I could not in myself, on my own power, with how I thought about life. I don't know how to love all of someone. I can love all your good parts, and then I can get mad at you for all of your bad parts, and then I can blame you for those bad parts because I need some justification as to why I'm behaving the way I'm behaving. I cannot show you all of me so that you only see the parts I want you to see, so that you won't see the parts I regret or are ashamed of, and then you'll never be given the opportunity to love all of me. I got to tell you guys, that's exactly how I used God. That's the right word, used. You see, I didn't want God to have all of me. I wanted God to have the parts that I felt like I needed fixed so that I could be better, or that I could be maybe more successful if they were gone, or I could earn a better living, or I could be cuter, or have a full head of hair and only one chin, which you can see that didn't work out very well, right? I thought I could control what I gave God. I can't. There's a guy named C.S. Lewis. He's one of my favorite authors, and one of his great influences was a guy named George MacDonald. And MacDonald had this great line, and the great line is that God is easy to please but hard to satisfy. Easy to please but hard to satisfy. And MacDonald draws this analogy with fathers who watch their children take their first steps. You see, any father would be and is absolutely ecstatic at those first steps that little child takes. They're beyond themselves. They're overwhelmed with joy. And we look at that joy and we look at that response by that father and we go, that is a good father. That guy loves his kid. And that's true. That is 100% true. But imagine if that father left the child alone at that point. That at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, the child could only take 2 steps and then fall over again. You see, any good father wouldn't just be satisfied with a couple of short steps. Good fathers would only be satisfied with teaching that child how to walk and stand up straight while he does it, keep his arms at the side, and then maybe learn how to jog a little bit, maybe learn how to run, maybe chase the dog in the backyard, maybe play some sports. But any loving father will push their child past their comfort level for the sake and the betterment of the child. That is our Father in heaven. You see, he's not content with what I want to give him. He's only content with all of me. And the deal is, I think, these are thinks, not knows. Mike, here's the deal. I'm going to give you all of me. The only thing I want is all of you. See, I never had a relationship that way. I think my mom and my dad loved all of me. I think that's probably the closest I've had to it. My wife today, I think we have that. But we had that for a separate reason. And that separate reason isn't that there's 2 of us in this marriage. There's 3 of us in this marriage. That I love her and she loves me with the power and the grace that God gives her and the power and the grace that God gives me. So that by loving each other, we can love him. But that's another story for another day. But prior to coming here, I don't think I ever had an all-in relationship with anybody. And I think step 7 really brings us to the place where we can say, God, you can have all of me. You can have all of me. And no matter what I want to give you, you still have rights and license to everything that I don't want to give you. Just like in step 6, help me be willing to do that. Help me be willing to find at least the words and at least the sentiment that you can have all of me. Because you're trustworthy. Because if that's what you want, then you deserve it. And whatever you make of me, that's your business. I'm willing to go along for the ride, wherever that ride leads me. And the beautiful part of that prayer, my friends, is that the end result of that prayer up to this moment, and I don't know what the end result will be by the time they throw dirt on me, But the end result of that prayer up to this moment is that he brought me to you here today, right now. He has given me so much more than I could ever repay. I don't even know, couldn't even begin to repay it for what he's given me. So I wrote this 8th step out, took the names off that 4th step, put it on my 8th step, and went out and started to make amends. And I made financial amends. And I went to old girlfriends, women that I wasn't really respectful with, and looked them in the eye as best I could, when I could, and tell them that I'm sorry for treating them that way. I went to businesses that I worked for. I went to stores in the neighborhood that I had stolen things from. I just went around and did stuff, right? Some were uglier than others, but I did them. And each time I did them, I got to tell you, I found something more, something bigger than not drinking. I found some freedom. I found some trust in this God that I barely met through Joe's story in the 2nd step, that my mom and dad had to try to teach me about from the time I was a little kid. Began to suddenly have this experience where I felt like I was meeting him, where I felt like I was having some level of communion with him, some level of relationship with him. Because on paper, all that list of stuff on step 8, none of that stuff should have gone right in step 9. I got to tell you, all of it went right. All of it. I even as imperfectly as I did the 9th step, I got to tell you, collectively, you couldn't throw a stone at any of it. It's unbelievable. I paid off tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars of debt. Shouldn't have had that. I don't have that kind of money. Little by little, by little, by little, it got done. I learned how to love my wife by going to the women that I've made mistakes with and trying to respect them, trying to show them the dignity that they really deserved way back, whenever they way back was. Starting to try to show them the dignity they deserve now, which I should have showed them then. I don't know how these things put together. It's like this puzzle, and all these little pieces are missing. And each time another name gets crossed off that 8th step, I look back down at the puzzle, and not only is the border filled, but the middle starts filling in. See, I don't know about you, but my middle is where the hole was. My middle is where the absence of substance was. It's like an empty, dry well. And everything I would throw in there, no matter what it was, alcohol for sure, but it was a lot more than that. It was pride and manipulation and lies and stealing and selfishness of every single kind. I would throw in this well. Possessions, I would throw in this well. Relationships, self-promotion, I would throw it all in this well. And I would think, once I'm filled, then I'll be okay. Guys, the only thing that more stuff in that empty well produced was more dryness and more dryness and more dryness and more dryness. And the old Mike would go to booze to satiate the dryness. How ironic, right? How ironic. There's only one thing that fills this today. And it's not money or my job. It's not my house. It's not what any of you really think of me. It's a God who reached in the gutter back in August of 91 and pulled me out through a guy named Brian, who lives in South Carolina. He lives in Columbia, South Carolina. I owe my life to that guy. And I will be forever trying to pay back that debt. He met me in a hallway when I was at work, and I was contemplating leaving the planet by my own hand. And he saw me, and he talked to me for about 20, 25 minutes in that hallway. And that meeting that he invited me to led me to another one. And then that meeting led me to another one. And eventually I went to a meeting with a guy named Joe Friday in it. And Joe Friday and I opened that book, and we went through the work that I just explained to you. And I had this thing that's called the Promised Spiritual Experience, the Promised Spiritual Awakening, that comes from working the steps. Step 10 to me is about living in the moment. It says we wander through our lives, right? And I don't know about you, but to me, life's a picnic, and all these things are little gnats at my picnic. Things like my fear and my just pride and my dishonesty and my selfishness and my greed and my lust and my envy and my jealousy. All these things at varying levels are just there. I don't want them there anymore, guys, but they're just there. All of a sudden, they just pop up and they're in my head. See, the 10th step gives me a chance to move what the first 9 steps gave me. The first 9 steps gave me a problem-solving set of behaviors, actions. Step 10, 11, and 12 bring me problem prevention steps. The first 9 steps clean up my past, problem solving. And see, if I can catch those feelings, those emotions, those upheavals, those moments of spiritual darkness, if I can catch them within myself before I act on them, before I bring them to my life, before I find a victim to vomit them up on, guys, that's problem prevention. All it is a feeling. If I feel greedy, but don't act greedy, I'm not greedy. That is fantastic news. If I feel selfish, but don't act selfish, I'm not selfish. So the 10th step says this: when I see any combination of those 4 things, selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, or fear, I'm to do 4 things. First thing is to ask God to remove it immediately. Ask God to remove it. Second, talk to someone. Third, make amends quickly if I've harmed anyone. And that 4th one, man, that is magic. That 4th one, that is magic. Resolutely turn my thoughts to someone I can help. Resolutely turn my thoughts to someone I can help. Whether that's saying a prayer for a good friend of mine who's in Knoxville, Tennessee today with a work burden, right? Whether it's a good friend of mine in South Africa who's got a property dilemma going on, right? Whether it's a good friend of mine in Omaha wondering and worrying about this weekend and all that comes with it, right? Whatever that is, right? Maybe it's being a nice guy to a clerk at a store when they're out of something. Maybe it's doing anything. Certainly the 12th step in carrying our message applies there too, but it doesn't have to. It can be broader than that. So that moves me from problem solving to problem prevention. And then step 11 is about just letting that thing grow, man, throwing gas on that fire. Thomas Aquinas talks about if we want to be closer and growing in the image and likeness of our God, we need to get near him. And he uses this analogy. He says, just like if there's an open campfire and we go up really close to the campfire, the closer we get to the campfire, the more heat we feel. We can feel that heat coming off that fire. And when we turn around and walk away back into the cold, if we touch our clothes and touch our face, we can still feel the heat from the fire. To me, that's step 11. I used to think prayer was about reciting and technique and making sure that I got the right program involved in prayer. And then what I got to do, I can't just have that right technique. I got to make sure that I have the right technique, right? I got to make sure that comparatively speaking to your prayer life, mine is better, that I do it the right way and you're still sort of figuring it out. I mean, it's just crazy stuff. Guys, I got to tell you, in my experience, prayer has almost nothing to do with technique. It has everything to do with attitude and everything to do with communion. Am I seeking communion with God? Or am I just checking off things that no, I said the serenity prayer, I said the 3rd step prayer, I said the 7th-step prayer. Great, I've done my prayers for the day. Now I can walk out in the world and be a jackass, right? It has to be more than that. It has to be more than that, I think. I'm not saying God won't honor that given where we're at and all that. So I get all that. But we got to be growing somewhere, right? We got to be growing somewhere. And I think where we're called to grow is this beautiful thing that comes out of the 12th step, the 11th step and the 12 and 12. And on page 99 there, Bill has this little paragraph and he talks about how self-examination, meditation, and prayer all are an unshakable foundation for life, right? And if we're practicing that, somehow, some way we get this, what he calls a glimpse of God's will for us. You think about that, a glimpse. That's when I only heard a little bit of Joe's story. I was sitting at that table in the crack pot years ago and a little glimpse. And then I was at another meeting and I saw a little more glimpse. And then this is, and suddenly, through great sponsorship in that book and this work, and time and effort, I still get those glimpses, but they're a little bit longer. And my hope for the rest of my life is those little glimpses of gaining an understanding of who God would have me be, that glimpse turns into a glance. That small little glimpse turns into a glance where I can look at it a little bit longer. And my hope is someday when they throw dirt on me that I'll get to gaze at him forever. That this glimpse that Bill was talking about in my life will turn into a glance and then into a gaze. And I got to tell you, I think that moves me to step 12, because that's what I want for all of you. That's what I want for the men I sponsor. That's what I want for my wife. It's what I want for my boys. It's what I want for my grandchildren. My family's going through a hard time right now. And if it wasn't for the love of my family and the men that I sponsor and my sponsor, I'm not sure really where I'd be. It would be very tough. It'd be very tough to stay happy, and be very tough to stay connected to a God when I see these things go on and I can't figure out what he's doing. And I think I got to figure out what he's doing. So I look at it and I say, well, this isn't right. That isn't right. God, you got to move this piece. You got to move that piece. He's already moving the pieces. He's already trying to get these people, these good people who I love deeply, to get a glimpse of him so he can move it to a glance, so it can become a gaze someday. I know that. I know that. A buddy of mine called me right before this meeting. That may not seem like a big deal. We didn't have any profound things to say to each other except for two. He wished me well and he told me he loved me. Guys, my life is full. My life is full. This 12 step is an amazing, amazing thing. You see, when I look back at Joe Friday, that wasn't my story, right? What you heard today was God's story. That was God's love story to me, because he put because a man was committed to the 12th step, just like Brian in that hallway. Just like Brian in that hallway. See, Brian and Joe were committed to the 12th step. Don, today, Dick, then, Keith, back. They're committed to the 12th step. And when they're committed to the 12th step, guess what they get me to do? My work. First part of that 12th step says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. Guys, if you're out there today and it's your first meeting, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous, as I said earlier. If you're new in AA and you're just getting started and all these things seem fresh and exciting, great, terrific. If you're new and it doesn't seem exciting and it doesn't seem fresh, and who are all these chubby people talking at me, right? Stick around. It's coming. Stick around, right? If you're an old timer and we've been standing on your shoulders for decades, thank you for the example. What a beautiful backdrop of this office to be saying that today. I'm not even sure how I could say it fully. I can only allude to it. But lastly, I don't want to talk about the new person anymore. I want to talk about the old timer anymore. I want to talk to the person in the middle, right? The people who are out there in Alcoholics Anonymous, the vast majority of us who know the slogans and know the book and can say the right thing. And maybe there's a couple of people they sponsor, and maybe they got a sponsor, but it's maybe been 6 or 8 months or maybe years since the last time you talked to them or her. I don't want to talk necessarily right now to the folks who are at their first meeting of AA. I want to talk to the folks who have decided that this is their last meeting of AA. That darkness in your heart can be fixed. It can. I don't care what it is, it can. And not because I say it, not because Bill wrote a book, but because the actions that Bill wrote in that book lead us to a God who loves you. Leads us to a God that will solve that problem if we will let him. If we will let him. I don't know your story. I won't even presume to know it. But I got to tell you, this idea of the 12th step is about 3 things. It's about having my own experience so that I can be committed to that, so that I can bring the message to people who haven't had that opportunity yet. And the second part is about trying to carry the message. You know, if you've been around AA a little while, the question then would come out, well, how are you trying to do that? Are we all trying to do that? You heard Chris last night, man. What a powerful, beautiful message about the importance of being a sponsor, of carrying the message, of sitting on the other end of the table like you did one day with a book open, coaching someone on a 4th step, here in a 5th step, whatever it might be, coaching someone through a 9th step. You say, well, I don't know how to do that. Well, that's what your sponsor's about. Well, I don't have one. I got to tell you, I heard a guy talk years ago, and he talked about a strand of 3 rings is not easily broken, always be in the middle. That everybody in the world needs a Paul, everybody needs a Jonathan, And everybody needs a Timothy. And his point was that everybody needs a teacher, Paul, right? The one who's ahead of us, pulling us forward. The Jonathan, the best friend of David, the guy who stands shoulder to shoulder with them, walking them through their treachery, walking them through their challenges, walking them through their agony. And a Timothy, someone that they're pulling forward, someone that they're moving closer, someone that they're sharing their life with and showing them it's okay to be broken. It's okay that God is trustworthy. And then to practice these principles in all our affairs. You know, I got to tell you, when I hear that part, I always think there's a great line in the fear inventory of the big book. And it says, we're in the world to play the role that he assigns. That would be all my affairs, I think. And the very first thing that comes to my mind when I think, what role has God assigned to me? I got to tell you, it's husband. It's husband. See, I don't know how that looks, this idea of what role God has assigned to me, but I know that's one of my roles. And I know that because my wife tells me it's one of my roles, right? But I knew that already. You see, no one else on the planet has been given the opportunity to afford my wife the chance to be loved by a husband. She can be married to anybody. She's beautiful. She likely could be married to a lot better people than me. I got news for you. Those of you who know her know I'm not lying. But I'm the one called to love her like a husband. And if I don't do it, she'll never get that kind of love. I have two stepsons, Kyle and Cody, that I would take a bullet for tomorrow. I love them. And the legacy of my father needs to be carried on to those boys. I'm not called just to have the boys. I'm called to engage the boys, to love them, to as best I can, to as best that they'll allow me to be their dad. I have 3 grandchildren. I know a lot of people out there have grandchildren, and I think you have the best ones, but you need to inventory that because I have the best ones. Grayson, Rose, and Hank are everything to me. And I long for them. I long for them to have a better life than I had. And I'm going to do whatever I can to try to help them have that. Why wouldn't I? My beautiful daughter-in-law, Teresa, who I love with all my heart. I mean, these are the people that are in my life. These are the roles that God has called me to. Sponsor, employee, employer, friend, right? All of these things. How can I take the love that he has given me and bring it to these relationships? Guys, I think that's what recovery is all about. Certainly sobriety is an enormous part of it. Certainly. But I truly believe that sobriety and Alcoholics Anonymous is the starting line, that it is not the finish line. You know, if you'd have said to me, this 24-year-old kid who walked into Alcoholics Anonymous almost 30 years ago, please God, I make it this August. Hey, Mike, if you stick around long enough, we'll give you a metal chip with Italian numbers on it. I would have been like, what? That's not the greatest gift we get here. The greatest gift we get, I think, as I sit here today before you, with the backdrop of all this history, in a town where it all started, with friends who I love and who cared for me for the last 2 or 3 days like nobody deserves to be cared for, is this. A loving God who gives me the opportunity to take him to other people. I used to pray to not be divorced. Please, God, we're going through a trial. Please don't get divorced. Now I pray this prayer. I say it every morning with her. Dear God, help me love her in such a way that she knows you exist. That's my prayer for my marriage. That I'll love my wife in a way where she knows that he loves her. That's my prayer for my kids. That I'll love them in such a way that when times get hard, because we all know the hard times are coming, that they'll remember that God loves them. For my grandkids, the same thing. And for all of you. I want to thank you for this opportunity. Once again, I want to thank the committee. And I want to close with this one thing. If you're out there and you're suffering, maybe this will ring true. Maybe this will help. I don't know. Maybe it won't. But for me, this whole thing reminds me of a story. But when I was 7 years old, my mom and I were walking through Toys R Us. And we came across this end unit. And there were these toys there. And they were robots. And it was from a show called Lost in Space that was very popular when I was a kid. And I wanted to be Will Robinson. He was like the kid in this story. And he'd go around the galaxies and have all these adventures. And man, I wanted to be Will Robinson. So we came around this thing and I saw this robot. And I asked my mom to give it to me. And it was in November. And she looked at me with those Irish Catholic mother eyes and said, not today, but if you're a good boy, Santa will bring you one for Christmas. Well, she lied to me. I was a bad boy, but Santa brought one anyways because I have a good mother. And I opened that thing up and I played with it for about a week. And I got to tell you, I've had an amazing time. I mean, the couch was one planet. The stairs going into the crater was a part of the moon. I mean, I was everywhere with this thing. I was into it. And somewhere around the 5th or maybe the 6th of January, my mom ran off to this store called Woolworths and she bought some D batteries. And she shoved them into the butt end of this thing and it lit up like the 4th of July. See, I thought I had fun with that toy before it had batteries. It wasn't even close to the joy it brought me after it got power. Guys, I got to tell you, I got to submit to you, on August 27th of 1991, I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous exactly the way that toy was brought to me on Christmas Day. You see, it was brought to me, batteries not included, just like I was brought to you. And the first 9 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous was like a walk to Woolworths. It gave me the batteries that I needed to have a shot at life. Steps 10, 11, and 12, keep those batteries charged. If you're newly sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, welcome. Get a sponsor, do the work. If you're dying in Alcoholics Anonymous, God bless you, you're in my prayers. But don't let another day go by without picking up this book or picking up your phone, calling the person you know can help you. And if you don't, find someone. God loves you, he's with us, and he loves Alcoholics Anonymous. 86 years of Alcoholics Anonymous. God bless you all, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share a little bit about what he's done for me. Thank you so much. God bless you.